All right, just count to 10 real quick.
Out loud?
Uh-huh.
Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay. Now count backwards from 10.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, that's
Is
good.
this a psychiatric test? It feels like a drunk test I took on Jefferson Avenue at 4 a.m. once.
Did you pass?
Yeah, I don't know how I did.
You got a heckle?
We all got heckled. Standing at the courthouse in Cortland.
Oh, man.
And the last concluding hymn was the Black National Anthem.
I'm sure they didn't want to hear that.
I don't know, they were in their trucks. They got trucks and that kind of funeral stuff you see at McGowan's and funerals I was talking about. Well, the black people jumped on those 6 buses so fast. And I said, what happened to the people? I forget what next to me, Phil Lucas was one. They just said, you just don't get it. We're in Cortland, Virginia, where Nat Turner was condemned and hanged.
Yeah.
And I had a judge.
The wig on?
Yeah. And it was in the Virginia Pilot.
Yeah.
You seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it.
With Phil Lucas as the slave, as Nat Turner ran.
Right.
Well, slave, yeah. We were nervy. I didn't think so much about it at the time. I could see that the Mass and the celebration of weddings and funerals and baptisms, the whole thing sort of went over the people's head. There's a legend that I tore rosaries out of ladies' and men's hands. I never did. I told them, put those trinkets away. We're having worship. And I got a terrible reputation for that. Of course, I hate the rosary, but that's another subject. I really despise it. It's a phony prayer copied from Islam.
I mean, there were times that I didn't agree with everything he said when I'm sitting in that pew. I would say, and then I'd go up to him and I'd say, "Why did you say that?" And he said, "Oh, Alice, I just said it because I wanted people to think about it."
And he would shock you, maybe he'd use some curse words. He'd just get so into it with such zeal, and he'd get your attention. And at first, it just aggravated me to the point that I was among the many people that saw this as a very negative thing and says, what? He did what?
For 3 days before I was ordained, the bishop died. And when I arrived in Richmond, he was in his casket, which I always said was the best bishop I ever met, and which also people said the bishop died because he knew he was going to ordain me. That began sort of a legend. And at that time, I didn't have a driver's license because of my poor eyes. And I told the vicar general that I'd have to be in a city parish. And, of course, my first assignment was in a suburban parish. So for the first few months, I had to be driven around by a pastor's nephew to bring communion to the sick or do anything else. So then I arrived on May 22nd, 1958 at Blessed Sacrament, Alexandria, huge suburban parish in the suburbs of Washington where everybody worked for the military or as bureaucrats for the federal government. And it began an amazing experience. Pius XII died that fall. In November, John the 23rd was elected. And that was the beginning of a new era for the church at the very beginning of my own ministry. So there was sort of a collusion there, or better, coming together, a confluence of causes where young priests were allowed to express themselves like no generation before them, because the pastors didn't know what it was all about. So we sort of got away with murder, or people have always accused me of getting away with murder in the name of the gospel, hopefully. You read the gospel and you put it into action. So up above the church, about a mile, was an old black settlement. And those kids had to get on a bus at their own expense and ride through two other parishes to get to the colored parish, as they called it in those days, St. Joseph in Alexandria. But on Sunday, when they had no cars, they walked to Blessed Sacrament, which should have been their parish. So I couldn't believe it. I was astonished. And I had never lived in the South. I didn't know anything about what they used to call Negroes. I had no association. I hardly ever saw a black person until I was in a seminary out in New York State, you know. And I just went to the pastor, who was fabulous. He was before his time. And I said, Martin, why can't they come to school here? They can walk to school. And it'd be good for the school to have black kids. So that September, and I was only ordained 3 months, we integrated the school, partly because of my naivete. I noticed that half the congregation arrived late, had no sense of the Bible, the liturgy of the Word, and they left early. I couldn't, you know, the first one out of the church is supposed to be the leader, the presbyter, the priest, whatever, celebrant. Although he's not really the celebrant, the community is the celebrant, the presider, or the leader. So half the church would be, one or three quarters of the church would be empty when I was given the final blessing. So this drove me into paroxysms, almost of rage. You know, if you're going to come to Mass, come to Mass. If you're not, stay home. That was my attitude.
I'm not a believer in shock therapy type stuff. But I think that if we could tone that down, there'd be no problems.
Well, he was a good one for stopping Mass if someone left early. There's nothing for him to run out following someone or saying, hey, you didn't take the communion wine right in the middle of Mass. He shocked a lot of people. A lot of people said they'd never come back. A lot of people haven't come back.
In fact, here we are in 2010, and I'm talking about 1960. I'm talking about 50 years ago. And I can name people right now who are still living here who have not gotten over the pain and the hurt that they felt they endured from Father Thomas Quinlan.
I could just see it was all a disaster. You know, it was an instant religion. So I set out in my own evangelical reformer way to stop this nonsense. And I said, we got to wake the people up to what's coming. Because, you know, Vatican II was on TV all the time. That was the first good Catholic thing you saw on TV.
Pope John XXIII made modern church history when he called an ecumenical council of high-ranking prelates to consider reforms and changes in liturgy. The 81-year-old pontiff was stricken during the council, but recovered to take part in ceremonies before recess.
So Hans Kunk published a book, The Council, Reunion, and Reform. I had masses upstairs, and the next week I'd have them downstairs, and vice versa. So over about 3 weeks, I covered all 10 masses. Tell the people, you know, if you don't read this book, you're ignorant, or whatever I said. But anyway, I got a couple. He later became an admiral and a conservative Catholic. And he and his wife, Harriet, were out there selling the books after every Mass in the days when Catholics were not the best readers, and we sold over 1,000 copies. So that got the pastor excited too. So that was the beginning of a new era.
I went to church, went to Mass at Blessed Sacrament, and I got blown away. Because here was this priest in our old temporary church, which we used for over 40 years, climbing up into the pulpit, obviously a very intense, frenetic guy, climbing into the pulpit with volumes thick as could be. And I don't know whether it was that particular first Sunday or in an ongoing way, started quoting from Kierkegaard and Hans Küng and theologians like that. And this I should say was at least 3 years in advance of Vatican II, when he was actually proclaiming all kinds of renewal in the church. Here, a local, newly ordained, I might add, priest for the Diocese of Richmond, Virginia. And it was something that just took your breath away. And of course, I could already sense the division and the tension within the congregation because he was so different.
One of the first experiences I had was people reporting me to the pastor. Like once I was teaching an obscure doctrine, the Immaculate Conception, in the 8th grade school and to the public high school students, and I talked about what conception was. In those days, parents did not teach their kids what we used to call the facts of life or the birds and the bees. I guess they thought the kids were going to learn it, I don't know where. And the sad thing was a lot of them learned it from the wrong people in the wrong way. And so I explained what conception was, and then in those days, Immaculate Conception. So that was the first time I got in trouble, although the pastor was so good to me, I can't believe it, because I was upsetting everybody. But that was one little thing, that I shouldn't have been explaining conception to the children. But the good effect of that was that a lot of kids pushed their parents to explaining to them lots of things about sexuality that they should have known in kindergarten or in the 3rd grade, or a good parent would know when to teach how far you could go in explaining it. But you can't have a bunch of kids thinking that babies are made by storks and angels, especially when it gets to the incarnation, the celebration of Christmas, all those, Epiphany, all those, you have to know something about sexuality. And for those who still believe in the virgin birth, it's even more important. So that was one of my first experiences of not being a nice little priest.
When he left Blessed Sacrament in 1962, as I say, and we were told he had a nervous breakdown and that he was in rest and rehabilitation someplace. But he was there for a period of time, I don't remember how long. He was assigned to Kaiser, West Virginia, a very rural place, with an Irish pastor from New York. But TQ later told me the story that he and that pastor, they were badly paired, to put it mildly, and they were always at odds. And it came to one point, apparently, according to TQ, that the pastor challenged him to fisticuffs, to a boxing match, because of their differences. And this pastor had been a Golden Glove champion in New York City. And I don't know whether TQ knew that at the moment or not, but his response to the pastor's threat, as he saw it, was, "You lay a finger on me and I'm going to call the cops."
Hello? Yes. Yeah, hi. I'm good. No, I've been in Poquoson all day. Cal was driving me home. He interviewed about 6 or 7 people for the TQ documentary. Yeah, there's a new cartoon coming out. Yes, it's a Disney cartoon.